Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's ISE webinar. Got a great panel lined up for you because today we're going to be talking about how we can engage with schools. Obviously, in the coronavirus crisis, it's having considerable impact on all our activities, how we work in education and how we work as employers trying to interact with students. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'll introduce the panel, or get the panel to introduce themselves very shortly. But just a quick rundown on how our webinars work if you haven't dialed into one before. We've got a questions dialogue box on the platform. Because there's so many people involved, we keep your microphones on mute, but we really do want your interaction. So please pop a question into the dialogue box. I'll keep an eye on those, and I will either present them to the panel as we go along, but also we save sort of 10 minutes quarter hour at the end for question time. So I might save it at the end. If you do want to ask a question, I would ask please that you keep it relatively concise. I'm trying to do 2 or 3 things at once, which is never normally works out. So trying to read a very long question, sometimes it gets a little bit tricky. So keep your questions short and concise, but really do please keep them coming through. We're keen to have this as interactive as possible, and your panel are really keen to hear those questions. Final comment from me is around this webinar is recorded, so you will get a link later on today. Once the software's done its thing and downloaded the webinars and the videos, you'll get a link to that recording. So please feel free to share that with your peers and colleagues, because we're interested to get as much information out there as we can, because I think that's very much the role of the ISE at the moment. These are challenging times, so the more that we can help people share best practice, the better that we are for achieving all the different goals that we are trying to do, and the better that we can serve students as well. So that's it for me in terms of the logistics. Let's meet the panel. So I'll go around sort of the videos, the images that appears on my screen, and get you all to introduce each other. So Amy, can I go to you first? Would you just like to give us a little introduction?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks very much for having me. My name's Amy Higgins. I am Director of Employers and Partnerships at the Careers and Enterprise Company, which, for those of you who may not have heard of the company, we are the national umbrella organisation funded by the Department for Education to support businesses to engage with schools and colleges across the country, so that young people are prepared and inspired for the world of work.
Fantastic, and the ISE is a very committed supporter of the CEC as well, so great to have you on the webinar, Amy. Andy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Welcome to everyone. Good to see everyone. I'm HR Manager for MBDA UK. I look after early careers recruitment. MBDA, for those that don't know, are a defence company. We employ about 10,500 people across Europe, about 3,500 in the UK.
Cool, thank you very much, Andy. And last but no means least, Donna. Donna, I'm normally sat looking at you with this same image with a cup of coffee in my hand in your office, but we're having to be virtual at the moment, aren't we? So Donna, introduce everyone to who you are.
Hello everyone, I'm delighted to be here today. My name's Donna Mason. I'm the Careers Leader and Careers Advisor at Roding Valley High School, which is a community school, although we are now an academy, 11 to 18, and I've been the Careers Advisor here for the past 10 years. And Stephen is my Enterprise Advisor, so via the Careers and Enterprise Company, he came to me a few years ago, and I was absolutely delighted to be linked to the ISE, so I'm really pleased to be here today.
Fantastic, thanks Donna. And I'll get the plug in now. Roding Valley are a brilliant school, so as an employer, if you're not out there targeting their pupils, then you very much well should be. So right, so let's get on to the body of the webinar. That's what we're all here to talk about. So can I start with you, Andy, first, and just sort of having a look at the employer perspective. What actually, we've been talking about COVID, what impact has it had on your recruitment plans?
It's had an impact, Stephen, that's for sure. In the initial stages of the pandemic, we wasn't too sure about how the business would respond. There was that little kind of doubt in your mind that it could be an easy win to have an impact on early careers in particular. We did have an initial impact. We had a big decision to make. We've never had to do it, but we had to cancel all of our summer placements for June, which we did with a real heavy heart, and we left it to the last minute. But that was driven not by financials. That was primarily driven by practicality of supporting summer internships into the business, bearing in mind we are security sensitive. Our leadership, our senior leadership, have been incredibly supportive throughout the pandemic, and they've offered lots of reassurances about next year and what does it look like, and Is there going to be any impacts and expectations around early careers in particular? But really pleased to say that we are in a very similar position to previous years, and we're recruiting the same amount of young people for next year. So initially, mini panic, Stephen, in summary, but we've come out of it pretty well, and we look forward to recruiting about 220 people, young people, into the business next year.
Oh, that's really good to hear, and it's a message we're quite keen to get out there, actually, which is, I think, with all the doom and gloom and quite rightly the concern in the press is that actually there's a lot of recruitment still going on, and most of the businesses we talk to are recruiting, to very similar numbers that they were previously.
Yeah, absolutely.
So has there been a difference in how you've approached your graduate recruitment to apprentice recruitment, or do you sort of treat them all as they're not the same resource, but similar in terms of their strategic importance to your business?
Yeah, pretty much exactly the same, Stephen, in all honesty, in terms of the process and how we engage and how we reach out. I guess the obvious difference for us would be we've made a concerted effort in the last 18 months or so to be a bit more influencer driven with apprenticeships. So a lot more reaching out and engagement with parents and carers, and still supporting schools and still supporting careers advisors. Of course, that will never stop for us. But I think there's just been a more of an obvious change in what we do and who we engage with, the audience in particular, and that will never change. But in terms of fundamentally what we do and how we create interest in MBDA is pretty much the same across graduates and apprentices for us, Stephen, in all honesty.
So you mentioned schools there. Obviously, I mean, schools it's always been a more fragmented market, I guess, than the university sector, just by the nature of the number of schools there are out there. There's that simple fact to contend. But then you add the layer of COVID on top of that. So how have you approached that when it comes to actually your schools and college relationships?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's something that's evolving from one week to the next, quite frankly. I think we made the assumption, I think speaking to some of the schools that we do engage with, I think there's an assumption that their new world is evolving as well. We have to be very conscious of that schools are evolving from one week to the next as well. Their priority is still the teaching and the learning. That has to be their number one priority, and I'm making a big assumption, but I think it's a fair assumption. There's a lot of COVID catch up, as we refer to it as, and I think we have that same issue as an employer. But we've had to adapt, and I think that one of the things that we've again been very conscious of is we've used the time to evolve and change and look at what we do and why we do it and how we engage. We mentioned before we went live with this session that we move into a remote world, and remote probably isn't the right term to use, but certainly a remote working or different way of working, if you like. And we've had to do it. So all the things we do now, still remain. So all of our school outreach stays in place. It just means it's shifted in the calendar a little bit further down the line. It means that we do a lot more virtual engagement. So in terms of what we do, the activities and the general interactions with our students will be a little bit different. But the biggest thing I would say for us is it's allowed us to look at scaling up in terms of the volume. So, to give you an example, work experience in MBDA, typically we bring in about maybe 40 to 45 young people into our work experience programs each year. But with the virtual world, and I'll use that for the time being, but that virtual way of working now allows us to probably engage with a lot more students we did before. So there's a positive there, of course. And it means also as a business, we can look at always on mentality rather than kind of have it between March and September, which typically we would do within the business, driven by the needs in the business and support within the business. Now, because we go virtual, it just means we can be a bit more open to keeping that on all of the time. Just one thing to add to that, because I was thinking about this a short time before we come into the event. But I think one of the observations I've had, Stephen, is there's been a lots of rather gloomy pictures being shared, I guess, with media in terms of the future for young people. And I'm a realist. I accept that there's going to be an impact. I think we all do. I'm sure everyone on the call would agree with that. But one of the things that that we've got challenges as an employer, but we are fortunate that we are still recruiting young people. I mentioned about 220 people for next year, and it's not to gloat, but it's just making clear that the narrative is a positive narrative. The news that we share with young people is there's some positive news stories out there, and I think it's very easy to get sucked into just hearing negatives, and let's be quite frank, young people will, you know, they hear it too much, will just make the assumption that the world is nigh. And that for me is a poor narrative to share, actually.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Andy. And obviously it's one of those organisations that's putting market data out there. It's something we're very conscious of. In fact, our survey's out next week, and we're still crunching the numbers a bit, but it will show a dip. But I'm always keen to promote the flip side of that stat. So, you know, in May we were looking at vacancies down 10 to 15%. That's probably the picture that we'll paint next year. But that means 85% of recruitment still happening.
Absolutely.
And we're still, and I'm starting to hear sort of from some employers that where location's an issue, specialist skills, digital skills, there are still challenges, you know, getting enough talent. I mean, financial services, professional services, back in the last financial crash, we had vacancies we couldn't fill. Not many, but we had some. So you're right, it's very tricky to get that message out there. I think it's something we're beholden on all of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just talking a bit about working with schools, are there any, because there'll be other employers listening to this, and as an organisation, we're really keen to get employers working better and working more effectively with schools, and I know you guys are very good at it. Is there any kind of key bits of advice you would give to employers who are thinking about how do we do more with schools? How do we get engaged in the first place?
Yeah, and a good question. I think keep evolving, I guess, is a good one to share. I guess is try new things. I think one of the things we've learned as an employer, which I'm sure every employer on this call understands, is that this in our world in defence, we're not recognised as being always the quickest to react to new ideas, embracing new ideas. I'll be brutally honest with you. This has kind of forced us into doing things a lot differently. And we've recognised we've taken opportunities internally to say, actually, look, if there's an appetite internally to change, we'll change. And we've got a lot of ideas. So I guess my initial advice would be, if you're in a similar situation to that, try new things. Don't be scared to try a new program or try to engage a little bit differently. Try to reach out to schools where you typically haven't done that. We talked about technology, and we joked, didn't we, before the call? Technology has taken over our world a little bit, you know, in terms of platforms, etc. And I guess don't use technologies or see technology as a COVID short-term fix. I guess just see that you could engage with a large audience and how you adapt that technology to allow that to happen. So don't use that as just it's a short-term thing, and that's, you know, we'll go back to our old ways. Let's just use this opportunity to go forward, I guess. And I guess the other one I would say for me is don't make the assumption that schools are seeing COVID as a reason not to engage with employers. Again, I sense that lots of schools that we talk to, there's still an appetite. So then again, don't fall into that trap of it's COVID, schools have got different priorities, and therefore they don't want to do anything in terms of careers and the progression of careers and pathways, etc. For us, it's really important that that's still the case. That, you know, reach out, ask questions. You'll be surprised what you get back, I think.
Andy, that's a great bit of advice, and I couldn't have done a better segue if I'd scripted it into going over to Donna. We'll come back to some questions a bit later, Andy. So Donna, what's happening at schools? I mean, schools have been at the real sort of sharp end of this whole crisis. Now, how's COVID changed the way that you manage careers? Because I guess you can't do one-to-ones. You're not having big all school assemblies. I mean, I've been to some of your careers fairs, done mock interviews. I'm guessing you just can't do any of that at the moment.
No, we can't. We can't invite any visitors onto site at all. So I can't do any guest speaker assemblies, which that really disappoints me, because that is really inspirational for a lot of students. But I have had to completely reinvent the careers program. So it has actually gone more or less virtual, if you like. It's all on Google Classrooms and things like that now, because in the past, our program for the lower school was all delivered in their form bases, and we can't even have form bases now because the school has had to be zoned and bubbled, and so we've had to really be creative about how we deliver it and what we're doing. And I think for the lower school at the moment, we've got more of probably more of a fix on developing skills. So for the younger schools, lower year groups, developing the skills that will really help them in the workplace, going forward with the LORIC skills, the leadership, organisation, resilience, initiative and communication. So we're kind of working on those at the moment for Key Stage 3. And Key Stage 4 hasn't changed in terms of the information that we get. Like Andy said, I think it's been easier for us to share more information because of technology, especially to parents. You know, we've installed more technology, and it's made it even easier for me to communicate with them, and that's what I love, because I'm sort of getting through to parents as well as students, which is brilliant. The programme itself is evolving daily. It's a fluid situation at school, and I'm just, as I see things, adding them in and adapting to whatever I can. I constantly say to students, you've got to give yourself the edge. You've got to stand out, so you've got to really take on board what we're talking about. And I am still doing one-to-one meetings. I've thrown out in the summer almost everything I could from my office so that I can put students 2 meters away if they need to be, and we can wear masks, and I can have my door open because I've got a little garden in my office room, as you know, Stephen. And so, yeah, I've made it as safe as possible, and right the way across the years, they're all booking in appointments. So I have still got that, but they cannot come out of lessons. It has to be at the end of school day or in a break time meeting.
Got it. So are you finding that the sort of the decisions that your students are making are the same? I mean, they're still thinking about going to university, they're still looking at programs like Andy's, at his business, or is the nature of those decisions changing because of COVID? Kind of what are the, because I mean, they've had a really tough time when you look at those that did exams, you know, did their A levels last year or their GCSEs. So yeah, is there anything you can give us a bit of insight into that, into what the student mindset is at the moment?
I think in the summer, when it was results day, I would say we probably had half a dozen students that were intent on getting apprenticeships but hadn't sourced one. And they then suddenly leapt on the opportunity of going to university, and they made very late applications, literally that same day, and got into uni. So all of the ones that made applications late got in. I probably had a handful of students that didn't have apprenticeships, and I'm still sending them information. I managed to get one of the girls, or helped one of the girls get a job last week, which was great. At Roding Valley, we've always had the same structure year on year, despite COVID, is you have to have a foot in both camps, and you must research both opportunities of apprenticeships and university. So we are very big on doing both, unless of course if you have to go to uni because you've got a specific career path in mind, but we encourage students to look at both options. And at the moment I would say it's probably round about the same, but I think because we're still very positive about apprenticeships, like Andy said, we don't want to be negative. I never am, and your video is going out to them this week, Stephen, which is very positive. I still encourage students to look at both pathways, and then we narrow it down from there. So in terms of numbers, I haven't got a clear idea on that yet, because our application deadline to uni for the current year 13s is still coming. So I haven't got numbers, but I can share that at any time once we know the numbers. I do think it influenced some of our year 13 leavers in the summer to go to uni that would have taken an apprenticeship. Just for fear that they wouldn't find something, because they'd looked at the whole situation, and by then I think it was very gloomy for them, despite the information we were putting out.
That's interesting, because when we look at our data, the data that we collated in May showed that apprentice vacancies had taken a bigger hit than grad vacancies, and we think some of that was the cycle we're in. Again, we're still crunching the numbers, but actually it looks like the apprentice vacancies have bounced back. Again, we'll have that data out next week, but I think those opportunities are obviously still there. So have you still got employers coming to you, Donna, and all those good relationships that you've got, are they still current? Are employers working with you? Are they still keen to talk to your students?
Yes, in lockdown, I went out to all of the employers that we work with as a school and asked them, could they do something but personalise it? Because I felt that there's a million webinars out there for students to look at, lots of websites. And some of the ones that we worked really closely with were absolutely brilliant, and they created a video saying, hi Roding Valley students, you know, even random people that you wouldn't think that would do it did it. So I had some lovely videos to share with students. I engaged with Capgemini. They did the lovely virtual mock interviews for our students so that they would get feedback, so that they could try those. Had loads of employers come back to me about our virtual careers fair that I'm currently planning, and lots of them are really keen to get involved in that because it's a collaborative event, and that will go out to the whole of Epping Forest. So if anyone wants to join in on that, please do. And it's just a really nice way to make sure that all the students and children in the local area all get the same information and the same opportunities. So that goes out year on year to probably over 2,000 families in the Epping Forest district. And really, I think I've been really lucky with all my employers because they're all still engaging with me. I'm always keen to work with new employers, always keen to share their opportunities. Anyone that's emailed me, that goes straight on. So I'm a very firm believer in forwarding on emails, and the year 12s and 13s, it's a standing joke that in the sixth form you do get bombarded with emails from Mrs. Mason, but actually that's how you find your opportunities. Because as you know, they're teenagers, and if you send them an email one week, they'll have forgotten it by the next day. So I just keep saying little reminders here and there, but it works because it, you know, we had students go off in the summer to KPMG, to Ernst & Young, and, you know, a variety of other places. And that's because we constantly share information with them. We've got great relationships with a construction company in the area called Hill. And I would say for the last 5 years, they've employed at least 2 to 3 of our students on sponsored degree programs. So developing those relationships is really important to me. You know, I get employers now dropping me a little email, have you got anyone? So we're kind of bypassing the whole recruitment stage. And I do it like a real job. They have to apply, I filter it. It's just, I love the engagement with employers. Yeah, and always happy to go to events, obviously, but can't now because it's COVID, but do love a business breakfast if anyone's running one.
We'll do them virtually for you, Donna. Yeah, I can see Amy smiling because we're going, this is what every school should have, and I agree. I'll just pick up something that you said and Andy mentioned as well, actually, because Andy talked about influencers, parents, carers, and I noticed you talked not just about your students, but actually you talked about families. Is it important that employers think about actually that I guess that broader communication piece? They're not just talking to the individual students, actually you are talking to the people that help influence their decisions. Did you hear me, Donna? Are you still there?
Was that aimed at me, Stephen? Because you dropped out a little bit then.
Yeah, I must have dropped. Yeah. No, I was connecting a bit that Andy said about influencers and parents.
I'm here.
Parents.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a slight delay. Donna, I'll come back to you because I think we've got a slight delay.
From what I've caught from you there, because you're kind of dipping in and out, I'm guessing it's, yeah, I think you're talking about parental involvement. Okay.
Yeah, so is that something that you recommend, Donna, would be parental involvement? Something that employers should be thinking of? I think Donna's frozen. We'll go back to Donna. It's like, no, like
I'm not frozen.
Oh, she's back.
I'm not frozen. It's you. I can't hear you. It's dipping in and out. But I'm going to quickly say about parental involvement. If you don't involve parents with anything within schools, you get a much worse outcome. So by involving parents, your outcome is always going to be better. So I've found that if I've got an opportunity emailed to me, I quickly copy in that email to parents as well. So I go out to all parents and students on the same email, And I know it works because parents then email me and say, oh, thank you. You know, I've asked my son or my daughter to sign up for this opportunity. So parental involvement just makes sure that the students are reading their emails, they are taking up the opportunity, and they are kind of getting themselves involved and getting the edge.
Perfect. That was the answer we were looking for. Thanks, Donna. Just a reminder to everybody listening to use the questions on the dialogue box, because we've got some, you know, really great insights we're getting here. So please do make the most use of our panelists and ask them any questions that you want. Pop them into the text box and I'll relay them. Thanks, Donna, and we'll come back to you shortly as well, I think, once we get some questions coming through. So Amy, can I just turn to you now? At the CEC, what issues have you seen emerge for employers and schools because of the current crisis? Because I know you've also got your can-do guide coming out, and it's either out or it's due out, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's just recently been released. So, I mean, it was interesting at the start of lockdown when obviously everyone's worlds were sort of turned upside down, and we were kind of thinking maybe we'd be a bit quiet over the summer, and maybe this would be the time to do the things that always never get done at the bottom of the to-do list. But actually we were busier than ever, which is fantastic, because obviously we want business and education still to be connected. And I think, you know, what we saw was that businesses pivoted actually really quite quickly. For those who were still able to engage, you know, quite quickly people started to think about how could I do what I've been doing but in a virtual context. And I think, to be fair, in the business world, you know, we have been used to virtual sort of conference calls and things, maybe not to this extent before, but it certainly wasn't completely new news in the corporate side of things. Whereas with schools, you know, it's been a huge leap. You know, numerous schools have really had a rude awakening to having to work in this kind of way. And, you know, as Donna mentioned, you know, all the different tools that are out there and what should you be using. And of course, and rightly so, schools' focus has been on safeguarding for their students and making sure that all of this stuff is being delivered in a safe way. And that, you know, young people are feeling still connected and supported, particularly when they weren't back at school and they were still in the home environment most of the time. And I think, as Andy referenced, you know, it's such a fluid state for everybody, for businesses and for schools. So, you know, I think really encouraging that kind of partnership working on an ongoing basis so that we can together help navigate all the different challenges that are being thrown up from one week or indeed one day to another has been really important. I think one of the, you know, there's a couple of things that really stood out to us over the last few months, which gives us hope and backs up the conversations that have happened so far, is that, you know, we thought, well, maybe actually, you know, careers could sometimes be a struggle to get on the agenda anyway, and in these times perhaps it would be excusable to say, well, actually, you know, we need to focus on core curriculum, etc., and careers would go to the bottom of the list. But we've had more engagement from careers leaders like Donna, you know, from around the country than we've ever had before. And we found that, you know, our network was supporting careers leaders to come together in sort of virtual coffee mornings and that kind of thing. And they were getting, you know, really good feedback, and that was really welcomed, because it can feel very isolating trying to navigate this period, you know, on your own. And then in the summer, we were approached by Oak Academy, who were trying to support with sort of home learning, to come up with a way to provide careers sort of support to young people who would ordinarily be doing work experience, so typically the year 10s in summer, and say, look, what can we do to try and bridge this gap at the moment? So at haste, I mean, it was not stress-free, but within a few weeks, we pulled together what we called My Week of Work, aligned to some sectors that we'd identified with Oak. And we were just overwhelmed, really, by the employer support that we had for that, at a drop of a hat, to, you know, corral the troops in their business, to be recording themselves from home, and to really give insight to young people. And we also partnered with Learn Live to run some virtual sort of presentations and offer opportunities for Q&A from students. And we've had, you know, over 150,000 views of that content since it was launched in the summer. So there's still a huge appetite there, both from schools and employers and young people, to have access to these things. And I really echo the comments that have been made so far about needing to just balance the narrative that's out there. I mean, look, we can't be naive. There are, hundreds, thousands of businesses who have been severely impacted. There are young people in very difficult circumstances at home. Schools are juggling a lot. This is by no means an easy street that we're all sort of treading at the moment. But there are positive things still happening, and there are some still really good opportunities out there. And I think we've been really struck by the engagement still on both sides of the fence, as it were, to continue, which has just been great.
Right. And have your, because I mean, we've worked very closely together for a number of years now since the CC was formed. I mean, are your key areas of focus still the same? Are they sort of adjusting because of COVID? I mean, what are the key things that the CSE are kind of zeroing in on?
I think, one of the things that has changed, actually, we'd sort of started to have more of a focus on supporting careers leaders, and that had commenced before lockdown, but lockdown's brought it into really sharp focus. So, what was good, as I say, was that there were lots of offers sort of coming up to support students, but that can feel really overwhelming and hard to navigate for the careers leader who, might not be their full-time job. There are lots of moving parts, as we've said, to this. So we switched from doing a termly or half-termly, newsletter to a weekly newsletter during lockdown, and it was sort of the golden source of truth. Like, if you only get a chance to read one thing, here are the key things going on, here are some great opportunities, etc. We're now easing that slightly. We're going to do 2 every half term going forward, but it's been a really key piece of work for us to try and cut out the noise for careers leaders and really try and synthesize the good stuff that's out there and deliver it to them in a very user-friendly way. And one of the things that we also launched last month was our resource directory, which careers leaders can use to find resources, shockingly, but in a very easy way with filters that support them on different benchmarks or key stages and those sorts of things. So we're sort of calling out to employers as well to say, if you've got resources that would be useful that a careers leader or any of their teaching staff could use in lessons, please do send them in to us, and we'll assess them and then add them to the directory as appropriate to try and channel that in a really efficient way. I think for the business side of things, what we're seeing is that there is this sort of willingness and engagement, but sometimes it's like, well, where do I start or how do I do this? So the Can-Do guide that you referenced, Stephen, was our sort of step 1 in trying to support employers with that. So we did a guide for employers. We've also done one for careers leaders and providers that says, look, in this virtual context and for this next academic year, how can you best deliver the Gatsby benchmarks to young people? So for the employer guide, we've sort of taken the benchmarks that are particularly relevant to employers and just filled it with loads of examples from different businesses and what they've done with links to further information, so that you can sort of get inspired. And as Andy says, if you're thinking about, well, maybe I could do a new program or I could tweak what we've got, hopefully that would support that that thinking process. I think one of the other things that we're really keen to support as well is SEND students and SEND establishments, so those with special educational needs and disabilities. How do we make sure that employers feel comfortable and equipped to engage those students and those establishments? So we'll shortly be releasing some support materials for employers to, again, provide those kind of resources, tips, tricks, stories that they can learn from for that. So, we are also trying to sort of keep pace with the change, and as we hear the great examples that are coming to the surface across the network, share that as best we can across everybody, so that we can all be learning together, and importantly, keeping the focus up. I suppose that's one other thing to mention, is that there was talk at the start of lockdown about, brilliant, let's do everything virtually. We can reach every student across the land by doing one webinar or what have you. And it's important to say that that is still very useful to have that information out there, but in order for it to be a meaningful encounter for a young person, the more interaction you can have with that young person, the better. And therefore, it needs to be a mix of activities. You can do these broadcast activities that everybody can get involved with, but how are you giving students the opportunity to ask questions or to be given a project and have to sort of deliver a document or something that can be then reviewed and feedback provided? How are you giving them a chance to develop their skills? You know, another thing that comes up in a lot of conversations now is that the world of work is changing in many sectors, not all, but in many sectors, in terms of this sort of environment being the norm. It's very hard for a young person to you know, develop themselves in a more virtual context. So how do we support students? You know, I love what Donna mentioned about the Capgemini digital interview, sort of mock interviews opportunities, because that is how people will be interviewing, you know, for the foreseeable. So how are we preparing young people to be entering the world of work as it's becoming, you know, to look, and how do you build up their resilience skills or their communication skills? So if you're sat at home, you think, actually, I need help, and I feel confident enough to put my hand up and ask for help, because no one's going to see you in that office environment like they would have done before. So I think trying to learn from this and share the messages of that is really what we're looking to do over this academic year.
And I think you should do a direct plug for your can-do guide. Where can people find it, and what are the key bits that employers can tap into?
Yeah, sure. So it's on our website. If you go, actually, it's not the most helpful part of our website, I have to say. So perhaps, Stephen, we could share it or put it as a link for this video. But it's in our resource directory, so you have to go through the educators route, and then there's an employer filter there for it. As I say, it's sort of packed full of links that you can check out. It's about 30 pages, so you can just dip in and out as you need. But really what we're sort of looking to do is kind of build on that. So if you do have some really good examples of what you've done, please do kind of let us know about that so we can share it. We're looking to build up webinars like this for sort of peer-to-peer learning for employers, so you can be asking questions of how you've flipped your work experience to virtual, for example. And also it'd be great to hear if there are particular resources that you know, your business needs to support you in the outreach. Also, please let us know about that, because we are looking to develop that so that employers can do these things off the shelf.
Cool. Actually, I'm just looking at the questions box on my monitor, and Sean from I think it must be from the British Army says has talked about the base British Army supporting education page, which has lots of resources available. So
Great.
pointing in your direction, I think, as well. Yeah, Donna agrees as well. Andy, can I just ask you a question related to what Amy was saying then, actually, because she talks about virtual interviews, virtual assessment centres, and that's what I hear a lot of. Is that something that you've switched to, and is that something that, you know, students just are going to need to get their heads around, because they're kind of, I guess they're here for the short term. I sometimes think they're here for the long term as well, actually, as people find, you know, better ways of working that will stick.
Yeah, we had to, going back to having to adapt really quickly, we had to adapt, and we had to move all of our, all the graduate assessments were done by the time we got to COVID, which was great. It was just in time for the start of our apprenticeship assessment. So we had to move all of that online, which was no small task, I can assure you. But we did it, and we did it very well. But we learned an awful lot from that. We recognised, we made the assumption that, you know, even in as early as April, May, we've got to make the assumption that when we start our new campaigns in September for next year's intake, we've got to make the assumption that COVID is still going to be with us. And in hindsight, of course, it's still with us. And so we worked for an external partner to move all of our assessments to virtual world, essentially. That's just finished, and it's worked incredibly well. But it didn't, I guess it wasn't particularly helpful in terms of the last year. We moved all of our assessments to a strengths-based assessment. So all of that new way of learning and new way of assessing last year had to be then adapted to virtual world. So that was quite a challenge for us. But we've done it, I think, touch wood, relatively successfully. But back to your point, Stephen, you know, this could be our new world. I mean, you know, we've had lots of positive experience and feedback from this virtual assessment world, if you like. I'm always very err on the side of a little bit of caution, because I don't want to take away the personal element of bringing people on site and showcasing who we are and our culture and the working environment. That's really important to us still. So we've got to try and find a balance between doing some of that, maybe through video, which then kind of goes against what I've just said, I guess. But how do we bring to life who we are and what we offer, as well as creating a virtual experience and assessment? It's been tough, and I think this is where employers are going to lead in the next 18 months. I truly believe that most, certainly medium to large companies, will maybe 80% of those will stick with virtual outside of COVID. Is my instinct.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And Donna, from a student perspective, is it too early to say yet? Are you seeing your pupils go through these kind of online interviews and assessments, and are they okay with it?
Yes, we have just had quite a group of students participate in the Think Investments programme offered by Investment 2020 last week during half term. So they had lots of input on that. I think going forward, well, during the summer I shared the PwC employability programme, so that had loads of virtual things for them to work their way through. So yes, I think even in the past, before COVID, I always used to get the year 13 stand up in assembly and talk the year 12s through the virtual assessments or the assessment centres they'd been through. So hopefully going forward, we'll be able to do that once we can start putting students back together, or it will be delivered by a small PowerPoint from me about this is what you do, how you do it. And so they are going to get lots of information about it. But yeah, they've not many of them have spoken about it yet, apart from the ones in the summer that actually went off and got the apprenticeships, and they did a lot of virtual engagement anyway, even prior to COVID, because some of the companies have been using that anyway.
Okay, that's true. I've got a couple of questions here that I'll combine, actually, one from Shana, one from Mahina. So one is this question around digital fatigue, and actually, is there a danger that students are getting so much stuff online, there's so much variety, that actually this call on them to attend too much is just causing fatigue and a bit of disengagement? And aligned to that, actually, Hina's asked, is there, I think she's interested in student competitions that she could do with pupils, and she's asking about platforms. So are there good platforms that they particularly like, i.e. Teams, Zoom calls, PowerPoints? So two questions, I guess, in there, Donna. One is around, is there a danger of digital fatigue, and also, what are the platforms that seem to work?
Yes, there is a danger of digital fatigue, and that was actually identified last week on the programme that the students attended, because it was a daily programme, and they actually said that by day 3 the students were exhausted. It's a little bit too much. I think everybody, even as a worker, even myself, digital fatigue throughout lockdown was immense, and people that I'm around are saying the same thing. You're working twice as hard because you are literally glued to your computer. For students, I think it needs to be short and sharp. Competitions, yes, I think they're great, but they also then need to be teacher-led. And at the moment, teachers are, the workload is so heavy that I think to do a competition and have it teacher-led, you're asking for even more of a teacher. You can put the competitions out to students and they often take part themselves on their own steam, which is fantastic. The platform that we use for everything now is Google. But having said about Zoom and all the other ones, if it's during the school day, then a teacher has to be present on that meeting because of, the care that you have to take. And so therefore, if it's something, we've had several companies or people that I work with come forward and do webinars, then I have to join it. So I have to be part of that process and remain online the whole time that students are there. And that's obviously for child protection and for safety. So we can't just, I think doing live things as well is very hard for us. If you put things out live, invariably half the students are going to miss it. So we are saying to employers, if you do anything or you want to do things, please do it as a recording so that we can put it somewhere where they can revisit constantly. It's not just a one-off event that they've missed. And I think that for us is quite important, but safety and child protection is the main issue.
I think that's a really important point, Donna, something that I think sometimes employers forget, the difference between dealing with with students at school age, and those at university, is there's other considerations to think about. Andy, would you have similar comments around that sort of fatigue piece and platforms and how you use them, and how you think a bit differently about how you deal with schools?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I echo what Donna said, really. I think we've all got a little bit of fatigue over the last 8 months or so, haven't we? I think it's important. I think this goes back to what I said about adapting, isn't it? So we're learning as we're going along. And I think that what I sense we'll end up doing, and certainly I can't talk for schools, certainly, but from an employer perspective, we'll adapt the need and the content when we engage, and try and mix it up a little bit so it doesn't feel like it's the same format, it's the same structure, it's similar content. I think it's going to be difficult to try and get away from using digital platforms for obvious reasons, I guess. It's just how do we minimize the need to do that, and then when you do, improve the quality of content, and just go back to what I said, change the content. And you know, because I think if we all follow the same kind of mindsets at the moment, I think, you know, Donna, you're right. I think everyone's going to get so, quite frankly, so bored of it that people won't sign up to events and just will switch off. And Donna made a really good point, which is an employer, which sounds an obvious one for us, but we, you know, I think we miss it as an employer, certainly for MBDA. You made a really good point, Donna, with regards to recognizing that people, we need to record more content. And I think we've made the assumption at MBDA, we've done a lot of live sessions, and we're always quite arrogant, I think, sometimes employers, to make the assumption that everyone fits into our world. And actually, we know, MBDA know, I'm sure every employer on this call knows, we can't do that. We've got to fit into your agenda, we've got to fit into your timetables. And I think that is a really good point. Video as much as you can, and make it available for when it suits the student, the influencers, careers advisors, the teachers, etc.
I'd agree with that. Funnily enough, even from an ISE perspective, that was a big learning through this. I kind of thought, oh, people don't really bother with recordings of webinars. They don't look at those. Who's got time? We get far more traffic on the recordings than we do of the live sessions. So yeah, I think everybody's sort of learning that point. Amy, does that conversation resonate with you in terms of what you're hearing about when you talk to employers around the importance of gauging dangers, digital fatigue, etc.?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think everyone is starting to feel it. So I think it's becoming more and more, you know, there was sort of novelty at the start and it was all exciting. And, you know, now it's like, oh God, not another Zoom or Teams or Google or whatever. I think what's interesting is starting to see the kind of emerging trends on, for example, virtual work experience. So one of the examples in that can-do guide we've got was Turner and Townsend and Mace working together on working with the school on a schedule that kind of mixed it up, as you say. So you'd have sort of a daily check-in with a mentor at, say, 9 o'clock in the morning to just tee up the day and say, this is what you'll be up to, etc. Then it's kind of offline work, you know, which may involve some research on the internet, but it's not having to listen to presentations or be engaged full time, which can feel quite draining. Then having a sort of listen to a business leader at lunchtime from that business, or an apprentice or graduate chatting about their job and have the opportunity to ask questions. Then again, some sort of offline type tasks in the afternoon, and then a catch up with the mentor at the end of the day. So you're not all day in sort of back-to-back video calls, you know, which can feel really draining. And I think it's great to see that start to emerge, because we all feel it in our own jobs anyway, let alone for a young person who isn't used to necessarily being just back to back without any breaks at all, or opportunity to you know, just socialize or play, etc. So yeah, I think it would be very good to think about mixing that up. When we did the My Week of Work piece with Oak Academy, we had to do a very fixed structure based on the way the Oak platform was set up. But what was good was that it was sort of digestible modules that young people could access at any time, and they could watch all the recorded content, and they could do the tasks at any time that fitted them, which, you know, I think there's great improvements that have been made in terms of access to technology for young people, but it's still not perfect, and there are many young people who don't have permanent access to a digital device. So having that opportunity to be able to dip in when perhaps your parents aren't using the laptop, or your sibling isn't using the laptop, or maybe you're just doing it on a mobile phone and you don't have a laptop in the house. You know, thinking around those sorts of challenges and how you can make your content as accessible as possible, because, you know, Andy and many others are putting huge amounts of work into coming up with the content, and you just want that to reach, you know, as many people as it can.
Yes, very good point. Yeah, we all assume everybody's got infinite broadband and has a, you know, a private room in the house to work on, which is absolutely not the case at all. Is that something that you've had to factor in your dealings with students, Donna? Is actually, have they got access to enough technology and broadband, etc.?
Yes, we've had to purchase laptops for students. Even in some cases, we've had to purchase broadband. Yeah, just to make sure that they can access the Google lessons from home, because I think the whole school timetable is so different, and I think each school works it differently depending on the volume of students they've got. But yeah, it has been an issue. I do think there's still a place for live webinars, because I do think that for students to be able to ask questions of the employers, I think it's really nice. We had one last week, again with Capgemini, for fintech, and one of the students really put a lovely comment up afterwards, how it's inspired her for what the future could hold. So I do think that there's a place for a little bit of a mixture of both, but I think the recorded ones would reach more students. But yeah, in terms of technology, it has been difficult making sure the provision is there for every single student, and we do make allowances. Like you said, Stephen, there is often cases where there's only one computer in the house and 4 children and a parent are sharing it, so you do have to make allowances for that, for homework and things like that. So yeah, we do get more aware of that. I think the progress leaders get aware of that, so you can share that.
Love it. I think we're coming out of conscious of digital fatigue, so we're coming towards the end of the webinar. Andy, I thought, this is unscripted, Andy. I thought before we went online, you were talking about the virtues of working with the Careers and Enterprise Company and also with schools. So I wondered if you'd just like to say a couple of words on that to wrap us up about actually the benefits to you as an organisation and how it's helped you.
Yeah, sure. No problem at all. Yeah, our relationship with those guys has probably gone back about maybe a year and a half, 2 years at least. The major positive for us is that it allows us to two things for us. Firstly, make that link between us and these schools, which is clearly very important. But also, I touched on the fact that we make too many assumptions of what schools need, and CNC have actually made it very clear to us actually, you know, what the reality is. So kind of adapt to make us change and just think about a little bit more about putting ourselves into their shoes and their situations, if you like, and so that's been very useful for us. For those that aren't linked up or in any shape or form, I'd fully recommend it, because I think for us, it just allows us to understand that world a little bit better than we had done before, quite frankly.
Fantastic. And actually, there is one quick question that's come in that I missed, and it was actually to do with recording webinars. Is there a way of dealing with the Q&A bit if you do something that's recorded? Is there a way of actually, is it by giving an email address or something so that people can still ask questions?
Is that directed to me?
I think either you or Andy, if you've got practical experience of those, using recording and the questions afterwards.
Yeah, so long as they could, that's what we're asking for the virtual careers fair, that if there are any questions for students that they want afterwards, could you give a contact email address on that page so that students can ask questions? Are you happy to have that? At least then they can ask a question of the employer or the institute or whoever it is that's advertising on the careers fair.
Yes, just to echo that, Stephen, from our perspective, it's just making sure there's a vehicle, if you like, to ask those questions, or career site or somewhere that you can focus those questions. That's the most important thing. It's no harder than that really for us.
Yeah, if I can just jump in on that quickly, the way that we did it with that My Week of Work was through the Learn Live platform. They had a moderated chat, so the Q&A is always available there, and basically volunteers from each organisation being represented sign up to be available for a particular time period. Maybe it's during a week, and they'll get an email into their inbox when a question's come through, so they don't have to keep going back and checking. So that's, I think some of these platforms can also help with providing that on-demand type Q&A.
Smashing. Great. And those final comments, I think we'll wrap it up. Really, thank you very much, Amy, Andy, and Donna. You've given some brilliant insights. So lots of messages in there for people, not least go to Roding Valley High School. They've got brilliant pupils there, and work with Donna, work with the CEC, some great stuff there, and great careers at MBDA. So so lots of stuff there to take away. So thanks very much. As I said at the start, you will get a recording of this webinar. You'll get a link through. We'll put the link that Amy mentioned onto our website page as well. So please feel free to share it. And also please keep coming back to our webinar platforms, because some of the issues that we talked about here, we talked about selection and assessment, some other areas. We'll do specific webinars on that as well. And we also have them in our back catalogue. So use that as well. So we can't do a full round of applause. So in this virtual world, please think of an imaginary round of applause and resonating out towards you now. So that was great. Really good session. Thank you very much. And hopefully I'll be coming to your office soon and having a coffee again, Donna, before we know it.
Yeah, that would be lovely.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.